Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Kirsten Howe and I'm the Principal Communications and Engagement Advisor with the Victorian Disability Worker Commission. I'm your host for today's event. On behalf of the Commission, we'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, our First Nations people. I recognise that the land on which we live and work is Aboriginal land, always has been, always will be. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Today's webinar is focused on the voluntary registration of disability workers that's being introduced from 1st of July this year. And it is great to see so many people joining us from across the disability sector today. There'll be presentations from the Commissioner of the Victorian Disability Worker Commission, Dan Stubbs, Chair of the Victorian Disability Worker Registration Board, Melanie Eagle, and Manager of Registration, Operations and Development, Karina Morano. Following the presentations, we've set aside time for a question and answer session. Throughout the presentation, we encourage you to submit questions via the live Q&A platform Slido, and there are 3 easy steps to join. All you need to do is open your web browser, go to slido.com, enter the event code, which is hashtag DWREG, and if you have the Slido app, you can actually use that to join as well. You may have already submitted questions in advance to us, and thank you very much for that, and we will address those as part of the Q&A. Or with the Slido platform, you can also vote on questions that are being submitted by people. So thanks again for joining us today. And I would now like to introduce Dan Stubbs, Commissioner for the Victorian Disability Worker Commission, to provide an overview of the work of the Commission. Thanks, Dan.
And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm really pleased and really glad that so many people have been able to take the time to join us to hear more about registration. Just by way of background, the scheme is established under the Disability Services Safeguards Act. We refer to it as a excuse me. We refer to it as a scheme because it covers there's a registration aspect to the scheme, and then there's a process of overseeing unregistered workers as well, which I'll briefly refer to. So in that way, the Commission covers all disability workers in Victoria. So that's any worker who assists people with disabilities, provides support, or does work to assist a person with disability in relation to the barriers they face caused by their disability. The scheme was established by a parliamentary inquiry back in 2016, it was driven, I guess, by a parliamentary inquiry back in 2016. In that inquiry, there was systemic abuse and neglect identified of people with disability right across the services sector, hence this need for oversight and regulation and quality improvement for the disability workforce. A bit about the purpose of the scheme. It's really that there's, I guess, 4 broad purposes, really to ensure better quality support for people with disabilities, greater safety for people with disabilities, an increase in the skills and qualifications and promotion of skilled quality workers, and a continuous improvement process for the disability workforce as well. The registration scheme, as you now know, comes in on 1 July this year. Melanie and Karina will talk about that more in a moment. But essentially, it's about registered workers, and there are a range of standards which we'll hear about in a moment. The Commission also has a complaints process where people can complain about any disability worker in Victoria, registered or unregistered, and there's also a notification scheme where other workers and employers can notify us of certain conduct by disability workers. And if people need to lodge a complaint, particularly people with disabilities, we have staff at the Commission who can assist with that. Just a bit about the governance of the scheme. I've indicated that the Commission and the scheme covers two types of workers, registered and unregistered workers. Obviously, at the moment, we cover all disability workers, all of whom are unregistered. The flowchart that you can see there shows that registered workers are overseen, and the processes and the standards and things like that are overseen by the Victorian Disability Worker Registration Board, and unregistered workers are regulated by myself as Commissioner, and with the Commission obviously doing work on behalf of the board and myself as Commissioner. And obviously there are overlapping features of our work, or intersecting features of our work, because the board and myself are interested in the whole workforce. And so the related functions relate to investigation of disability workers and what we do in response to that. Things like we can warn a disability worker or send them, or counsel them about their behaviour, and right through to, in fact, temporarily or permanently prohibit a worker or deregister them from being a registered worker. Finally, if you'd like to know more, and I'm sure you would over time, we really urge you to subscribe to our e-newsletter, which comes out around about once a month. It's fairly short and providing topical and current information about the scheme. So please just go to our website and you can see on our website where to subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks again for everyone for logging in today, and it's my absolute pleasure to now introduce Melanie Eagle, who's the chair of the Victorian Disability Worker Registration Board. Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you. And thank you, Dan. But also I'd like to reinforce our appreciation to everybody for participating in this event and showing enthusiasm for this important work of improving standards and quality of work that's being done, and safety for people with a disability. So just this aspect in relation to the registration that we're here to focus on today, part of that more complex structure that's been set up generally. This Disability Worker Registration Board, as you've heard, is responsible for registration of Victorian disability workers. We set standards as we go about that, and they'll be explained more as we go today. And we'll also have the responsibility over time for accrediting approved programs of study. The board also responds to complaints and concerns about registered disability workers, and we'll have a process working with the Commission for doing that. So as the Commissioner has already explained, we work closely together to ensure effective regulation. Now, as to the board, and the names of the members are listed there, but they bring extensive, I guess, experience from across the sector. So we've got people with disabilities, people who have worked as disability workers, people who might be academics in the area, and people who run services. So, and people who have broad governance skills as well. So we've got a broad range of skills that are able to be brought to our considerations as we set up this new way of regulating people. And one of those, Scott Shepherd, is here and will be participating in the panel later, but there are other board members participating today. Thank you. I'll now hand over for more detailed explanation of the regulation to Karina.
Thank you, Melanie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to the almost 300 of you out there in the virtual seminar room for this opportunity to tell you about the Victorian Disability Worker Registration. As Dan, our Commissioner, mentioned, registration of Victorian disability workers is a key part of the Disability Worker Regulation Scheme. For the first time in Australia, we see a regulatory focus on the worker instead of the service provider. Registration is voluntary. It's a positive system of regulation that allows workers to choose to opt in and be independently assessed by the board in a range of ways. In turn, registration tells the community that the disability workers, are a registered disability worker and that they are safe and competent in their practice. The registered disability worker will have cleared a range of checks to be registered by the board. Some of the checks we will do in the first year of registration includes a national police check, English competency. We will check whether the disability worker has been subject to any relevant disciplinary or competency or misconduct and regulatory findings or actions by other regulators. There will be a check of the worker's training, qualifications or experience, and only once these are cleared will the worker be registered. Registration therefore aims to increase safety for people who rely on disability workers and the services they provide. Registration also increases confidence in turn in the sector. There are a range of benefits that flow from registration of Victorian disability workers who have cleared the range of checks I've just mentioned. There are clear benefits for people living with disability, for family members and carers, for disability workers themselves, and for disability service providers. And it doesn't matter how the disability worker or the service provider that employs them is funded, whether it's the NDIS, the TAC, or privately, for example. Each registered disability worker is assessed and checked in the same thorough way. For people with disability, their family and carers, they will be able to easily access up-to-date, independent and reliable information about registered disability workers by checking the public register of disability workers that will be available on our website. This information will enable informed choices to be made about workers who are best placed to deliver the support and services to suit the needs of the person living with disability. For disability workers who are registered, they can easily demonstrate that they have been independently assessed by the board as safe, skilled and competent by referring to the register, by showing the distinctive registration mark, which I'll talk about in a moment, and that they have been assessed as safe, skilled and competent. Importantly, registered disability workers together will lift the professional profile of their sector. With each registered disability worker, one by one, the sector becomes more recognised and respected for its ability to demonstrate the safety and quality of the services they provide. For service providers, you'll be able to easily access the public register to see who is registered and independently assessed by the board, and recruit accordingly. The distinctive registration mark that registered disability workers can display in turn increases community confidence in you as a provider. Only registered Victorian disability workers will be able to use the legally protected titles of disability support worker or disability practitioner. The board has developed the distinctive registration mark you see on the screen. These marks will only be available to registered disability workers, and we will be encouraging them to use them widely to promote their registration, to demonstrate to the community the safety and quality of the services they provide. The mark can be displayed on the worker's website, resume, email signatures, or business cards, for example. Now I'll go into a little bit more detail about registration. Under the Disability Service Safeguards Act, there are two divisions for registered disability workers, which you have just seen reflected in the distinctive registration marks. Firstly, there's the registered disability practitioner, who must hold a relevant tertiary qualification of diploma or higher in a discipline that supports people with disability and have relevant professional experience. Workers who meet the requirements of this division will be legally allowed to use the protected title of registered disability practitioner. For disability support workers, they can choose one of three pathways to registration in the first year: either the qualification pathway, the training pathway, or the professional experience pathway. The qualification pathway requires the disability worker to have a Certificate 3 qualification or higher in disability or a relevant field. The training pathway, whether the training is provided by an employer or professional training, requires the disability worker to have training that aligns to the outcomes of the Certificate 3 in disability. The professional experience pathway requires the applicant to have 2 years of experience as a disability worker. Workers registered in this disability support worker division will be legally allowed to use the protected title of registered disability support worker. Then, within these two divisions, there are three types of registration. There's the general type, which we are of the view that will apply to most workers. There's limited, which includes workers who do not meet the requirements for general registration but are otherwise eligible for registration for a specified purpose and period of time. For example, it may be a person who's undertaking some research in disability. The third type is non-practicing, and this allows workers to continue to be registered whilst not in practice as a disability worker. For the first coming registration year, the board has set 3 registration standards. These standards relate to criminal history, competency in English, and continuing professional development. Registration applicants must meet the requirements of each registration standard and comply with these 3 standards when they are registered for the first year. These registration standards were decided by the board as appropriate standards for the start of the Victorian Disability Worker registration after extensive public consultation in late 2019 and early 2020, where the feedback on these proposed standards was positive. In addition to these standards, feedback also supported a guideline requiring registered workers to comply with the Disability Service Safeguards Code of Conduct. For the first standard about criminal history, the board has decided that the NDIS worker screening criteria will be used to check criminal history. So once we receive the results of your National Police Check, we will analyse against the NDIS worker screen criteria. As many of you know, the NDIS worker screen criteria has 3 categories, and in very general terms, the first 2 categories list these the very serious offences that should a disability worker be convicted of one of these offences, they will not be granted registration. For category C of the criteria of the NDIS worker screen criteria relates to other relevant criminal history or misconduct information, and regulatory findings or actions. This category is broad, and it gives us some discretion to consider the circumstances of any information to decide whether to grant registration or not. For example, there may have been a conviction for a crime that is less serious in nature and occurred many years ago when the applicant was a young adult. We take that into account and decide whether the registrant is suitable to hold registration. The board has decided that each registration year will start on the 1st of October and go through to the 30th of September the next year. Registration lasts for 1 year and must be renewed each year. From the 1st of July to 30th of September, applications for registration will be received and assessed by my registration team at the Commission. For the first registration year starting on the 1st of October this year, there are a couple of differences to how registration will work compared to the second and subsequent years. In the first year of registration, a disability worker can be registered based on the qualification or training they have, and training that meets the outcomes of the Certificate 3 in disability as a minimum, or they can apply based solely on their professional experience of working as a disability worker. This means that existing disability workers who do not have a formal qualification in disability will be able to register by showing they are competent as a disability worker through their professional experience of at least 2 years. This ability to apply using only one's experience is only available for the first year of registration, so the coming year. We therefore encourage as many disability workers to apply for registration on the 1st of July this year and to use their professional experience to be recognised as a registered disability worker. And once you are registered, you can continue each year to apply to renew your registration. In future years, workers will be required to hold certain qualifications. This is all outlined in the Disability Service Safeguards Act, and these arrangements are called transitional provisions, or affectionately are sometimes referred to as grandparenting arrangements. In introducing the new Disability Worker Regulation Scheme and voluntary registration in particular, the Victorian Parliament did not want to disadvantage those experienced disability workers, and we know there are many of you, who are providing services but who do not hold a qualification from being able to be registered. Regardless of whether a disability worker applies to be registered based on their professional experience, training or qualifications, they must show the board that they are competent. This means that they have cleared all the checks I mentioned earlier. Also, in the first year of registration, there is no registration fee, so we hope that this also encourages many disability workers to apply to be registered. Applications will be online at our Victorian Disability Worker Commission website from the 1st of July. This is also an option for there is also an option for hard copy applications if required. Applicants will need to provide their identity documentation to be able to complete the mandatory police check. You will also need to provide information in your registration application that proves you have relevant work experience, training, or qualifications. Unfortunately, for those of you who have recently applied for the NDIS worker scheme, we are not able to use these results. The NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission regulates NDIS providers on a national level, and relevant workers need to undertake an NDIS worker screen. These results relate to NDIS work and not to registration of Victorian disability workers. The Disability Service Safeguards Act that we operate under and the requirements of the criminal history check were established before the recent NDIS worker screen arrangements took effect here in Victoria on the 1st of February this year. It will take you about 40 minutes to complete the application. It does require an investment of your time. There's a checkbox at the beginning of the application form as to what information and documentation you will need to complete the application so that you have this all ready before you start. You will also be able to save the application as you go and come back to it if you're not able to complete it in the one sitting. We are uploading new information onto our website, and the address is there on the screen, to help you start preparing now for your registration application and to be ready to go on the 1st of July. For those of you who've been keeping a watch on the rollout of the Disability Worker Regulation Scheme and voluntary registration in particular, you will have seen more information about registration over the past month to 6 weeks as we've rolled out our registration public awareness campaign. In addition to today's webinar, there have been meetings with key stakeholders and other engagement with service providers within the sector. We are also using a number of other channels to promote registration. This includes a large-scale advertising campaign and the development of new resources. I appreciate that there's been a lot of information that I've been talking about, and you're perhaps thinking about what it means for you and for service providers, what it might mean for your workforce. So we encourage you to have a look at the detailed information on our website and particularly on the registration pages, and to engage with us. Our presentation today will also be available on our website. As mentioned, part of the promotion of disability worker registration in Victoria involves an advertising campaign which commenced this week. This campaign features radio, print and videos, and we are pleased to be able to show you 2 of our videos now. These videos highlight the importance of registration to those who are in the sector. Thank you very much.
My team is Wisdom Tigers, and we win against Western Bulldogs. Elliot comes around, and me and him go to the footy.
Disability support helps Zach to live the life he wants to live because he has the ability to be able to go out and do the things that he wants to do without being restricted by not having someone who can take him or issues around safety and things like that. Making sure that it's a safe place for him, and that in turn makes me want to make it a safe place for others as well. The disability worker registration is important because it's just going to ensure that everyone has the right and relevant checks when coming into the industry, and just make sure that, you know, anyone who is working with our most vulnerable people are the right people.
I've been living on my own for 21 years. Child support worker who come and support me every day of my life. And honestly, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here today. I've got a life to live.
It's really satisfying to have a job that is so personally rewarding. It matters to me because I think there's a part of the community that needs more support, more care, and for me it's really wonderful that I can play a role in that. What I hope registration can help achieve for me, it allows people to trust me before they know me.
Well, we now come to the question and answer part of our webinar, and I encourage you to continue to submit questions via the Slido platform. And just as a reminder, if you did miss it earlier, you can submit questions by opening your web browser, going to slido.com, slido.com, and entering the event code #DWR And if you have the Slido app, of course, feel free to use that as well. And we will endeavour to get to as many questions as possible today. I know there's already been a few we've received in advance, and we'll be providing the Q&As and today's presentation and recording of the webinar will be available on our website. So without further ado, we'll move to the Q&A session. And joining us today on our panel, we have Melanie Eagle, Chair of the Victorian Disability Worker Registration Board of Victoria, who we met earlier. Also Scott Chapman, who's a board member, and also Perina Morano from the Victorian Disability Worker Commission. So welcome, panel. Thank you for joining us. Now, we've received a few questions in advance of the webinar, and I'll go to those if we can start. The first question relates to definition of a disability worker, and can we define what disability workers will be in scope? And I'll pose that question to Perina.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thanks for the question. The Disability Service Safeguards Act tells us a disability worker is someone who provides a service to a person with disability, delivers the service themselves, or in fact a supervisor or manages a worker to do so, and provides a service that is more than incidental contact to a person with disability, and that the main purpose of the service is to care for, treat or support a person with disability to manage limitations, to undertake certain activities that might relate to, for example, communication, social or economic participation, social interaction, self-care, mobility, learning, or self-management. There are different jobs and occupations or roles that can be fall within that definition, and it doesn't matter if the disability worker works for themselves, for a provider, or directly for a person living with disability. So some of the things to consider as to whether you're in scope of the definition of a disability worker is to consider, do you provide a service to a person with disability? Do you provide the service or supervise or manage someone who does? And is the service a disability service? And a couple of examples would be a teacher who provides one-to-one tutoring services to a person with disability to provide learning activities, or an aged care worker who cares for people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, whether they live in residential facilities or independently, or a worker who provides cooking and cleaning services for people living with disability in their home. And examples perhaps of what would not come within scope of the definition of disability worker would be a teacher who teaches a class of students who includes an individual student with disability. The teaching is in this setting is general in nature, and the main purpose is to educate all the students, not specifically the student with disability. The other example is a receptionist at a disability service. Hopefully that answers the question, Kirsten.
Thank you, Perina. Next question we have relates to continuing professional development. How will you define professional development? Does it need to be training run by a registered training provider? And if I can ask Scott to address that question.
Happy to, Kirsten. At this time, we haven't actually defined the professional development content and process. That's the work we're going to do over the next 12 months. But what we are mindful of is that there's a lot of really good training out there and that's available, either through registered training organisations, TAFEs, universities, or through in-house employer-run training. So we'll set what the content and the standards need to be in the coming 12 months and publicise that. We'll also consult with stakeholders about what that should be and look like, and then we'll make it as easy and as natural and as relevant as we can so that the training is of a high quality and is consistent, and that workers can access it and then be able to demonstrate that they've actually been deemed as competent in that training.
Great.
Did that answer the question?
Thanks, Scott. And we also have one about students. Will registration cover disability students? Is that one, Melanie, you could respond to?
Well, the answer is yes, but I think Verena would do a more fulsome job of responding.
So disability students, Perina.
Yeah.
So disability students will be covered by registration, but for the first year of registration, we're not looking to disability students.
Okay.
But
we've also had
the legislation, does contemplate that they will be included. So that's something that we will be working on.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. We've also had quite a few questions relating to the English competency and how we will check English competency. Can I direct that to Perina?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten, and thanks for the question. English competency will be a self-declaration. So on the application form, there'll be questions with regard to whether you're competent in the English language in terms of communication, including whether that might be via signing. So at this stage, it's simply a self-declaration.
Right. And then there has been a follow-on question about English competency. There is a question about professional competency as well, and how will that be checked?
Yes, so for the first year of registration, so long as the applicant clears all of the checks that I referred to, so that the criminal history check, whether there's been any history of being banned or prohibited or registration cancelled by another regulator, and there's evidence provided of either professional experience or training that meets the Certificate 3 in disability outcomes or qualifications, then the worker will be considered competent. Thanks,
Perina. Next one relates to the public register of disability workers. What's going to be included in the register and who will be able to access it? I pose that to Perina.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten, and again, thanks for the question. The public register is accessible by anyone who can access it on our website from the 1st of October. The register will include details including the disability worker's name, gender, suburb or postcode of their principal place of practice, registration details, so whether they're registered as a disability support worker or practitioner, and then the type of registration, so whether that's general, limited or non-practicing, and when the registration expires, any conditions on the registration, whether there's any disciplinary history, or other names the registered disability worker currently practices under, self-declaration that the registered disability worker is competent in speaking or otherwise communicating in English, and whether the worker is a fluent speaker in a language other than English. The board can decide to remove certain information from the register except the disability worker's name, where, for example, the disability worker has an impairment or to protect their privacy.
Great. Thank you, Karina, for that. Next question relates to the Disability Worker Exclusion Scheme. Will this registration replace the requirement for a DWES check? How does it interact with the DWES, the Disability Worker Exclusion Scheme? And I might go to Scott for that if you're comfortable with responding.
I'm comfortable giving the layman's initial response, but I'm pretty sure Perina will want to double check my details. But yes, the DWA scheme is being wound up, and there's a mechanism for the initial screening to refer to the DWA scheme for any exclusions. So our scheme will in effect replace the DWA for voluntary registered workers. Have I got that right, Perina?
That's about right, Scott. So the key point is that the scheme is being wound up, and the details are going over from the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing to the Department of Justice and Community Safety, and where that department will decide what to do with the existing information. We will check that list for as it currently stands when we're undertaking our various checks.
Right. Thanks, Scott and Perina, for that. The next one relates to the NDIS Safety and Quality Commission. How will the board and the NDIS work together to ensure safety of people with disability? And I might go to Melanie on that, if that's appropriate, Melanie, in relation to how will the board and the NDIS work together?
Thanks. I guess, respond generally to start with, and Perina might have some specific examples to illustrate it, but the NDIS is one of a range of stakeholders that we have to take into account in terms of, I guess, tracking what they're doing so that we're relevant, because that's a very broad question. Trying to streamline and make it easier where we can in terms of not being burdensome on workers who might have already provided information that we can then appropriately draw from them. So the example was given initially about the the police check and utilising this kind of standards that the NDIS then has for workers, entering into agreements about sharing information and making sure we do that appropriately. So there are, we're trying to, I guess, smartly and efficiently optimise those things and also bear those relationships with the NDIS and some other organisations that regulate or receive complaints, etc., and not make it burdensome on workers unduly. So, Perina, would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure, thanks, Melanie. I'd add that the NDIS Safety and Quality and Safeguards Commission is a stakeholder, as Melanie says, that we engage with, and we're finalising our information sharing arrangements with that commission to ensure that we check in the history of an applicant to make sure that they are suitable to hold the registration that the board grants.
Great. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Perina. Next question is about the potential mandatory nature of the scheme? Is there a future goal to make the scheme mandatory? If I perhaps go to Scott for that one.
Yep, happy to answer that initially. As an individual, because the board doesn't have a position on it as such. However, we recognise this is a journey. This is the beginning of a journey that will develop the capability and the accountability and the safety of disability workers, initially here in Victoria and hopefully more widely nationally. And it will take time to build that capability. It's a 10-year journey at least. So that, and we would think that we want it to be seen by people with disabilities as consumers of service, by workers themselves and by employers, that the voluntary nature of being a registered worker is such, and the benefit and the value is such, that it will form a critical mass that ensure that it doesn't need to be mandated. What do you think, Melanie?
Thanks, Scott. No, that was a great response. But as you say, that's not something that we determine. We are implementing current legislation, but I think philosophically, we hope that we demonstrate value as it exists over time for people, for those multiple players, and outcomes, for individual people, and that people choose to join it, and it might be emulated elsewhere.
Yep. Great. Thank you. Next question we have relates to registration and the NDIS scheme and the difference. Does registration supersede the requirement for NDIS safety screening checks? I go to Parina for that response.
No. The worker screen that the NDIS requires is for NDIS services and related to that. It's very separate and of course that's on a national level. The registration, the jurisdiction for the inaugural registration here in Victoria for disability workers is focused on Victoria. They're two very distinct schemes. One's a check, ours is a registration scheme.
Great. Thank you, Parina. Next question is in relation to cost. Are there any costs in the first year, and will there be a cost in the second year? If I can go to Melanie and Parina. Melanie or Parina?
So perhaps I'll start. There aren't any costs. That is something that the board is required to make a decision on, and we've chosen to not impose any costs this year for registration, and we're very much trying to encourage maximum access into the scheme and to reflect on how that's gone. And then afterwards we'll be in a position to reflect. As to the future, we can't discount that won't occur because there are obviously significant administrative costs in running the scheme. But we do also appreciate where the workers may well be at, in that it's many are not earning a significant income, in relation to this. They're not working full time or whatever, and they may be required to the cost of registration that they might be undertaking for more than one scheme then is an inhibitor. So these are the types of factors that we will take into account, in future years as to whether we would impose a fee. But we certainly wouldn't be rushing to do it, and we wouldn't be wanting to inhibit registration unduly.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. Parina, did you have anything to add?
Just to emphasise what Melanie's just said, and that the board is alive to the issues of introducing a cost to registration. I think that's well considered.
Yeah, thank you. Next question relates to professional indemnity insurance, and just the question is basically, do I need to have that, Karina?
Yeah. So for the first year of registration, we do have a question in the application form to understand whether workers are covered by professional indemnity insurance. However, it's not a requirement because the board hasn't set a standard in relation to professional indemnity insurance. The board will consider setting a standard for professional indemnity insurance in subsequent years, and that the information that we collect in this first year will help the board to understand what the take-up is of professional indemnity insurance and to what extent, and to then develop a standard appropriately.
Thank you. Next one relates to professional experience. How is 2 years of professional experience worked out? I can go to Karina again.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to apologise in advance for some mathematical gymnastics that I'm going to take you through to understand how we determine the 2 years. The 2 years is actually in the Act, in the Disability Service Safeguards Act, and we've looked to our friends at APRA and the Victorian Institute of Teaching as two regulators who have had to make a similar determination of determining experience, and the board has decided that 2 years equals 1,440 hours, but it's not as simple as working all of those hours. The worker must have done disability work, and I outlined that earlier, and it must be paid disability work and provided over 96 weeks, and that's over the 2 years. So within the period 30th of September 2012 and 30th of September 2022, and again, that's a particular section in the Act. What can't be done is to cram those 1,440 hours into a shorter period, less than 2 years, or indeed less than 96 weeks. And how we arrived at the 1,440 hours is we looked at...
Oh, sorry guys, I think I was frozen there for a minute.
Yes, and so I think I was as well. Apologies.
Apologies for that. We'll keep proceeding. So the next question that we've got relates to service providers, and what's the incentive for service providers with the registration scheme? If I go to Karina for that one.
I might hand over to Scott or Melanie for that one. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Look, again, as a service provider myself from a day job, and I suppose I refer to the employer. The benefit for an employer to use registered workers to promote registered workers is to contribute to the development in the sector of a professional workforce, but to have a reassurance and a higher standard for your workforce that is independent and separate to your own, which I think is valuable and a good thing to do and worthwhile as an employer, as well as providing that security and confidence to clients as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Scott. Now, this might be our last question for today. How to register? Will it be easy to register? The NDIS safety screen check was not easy to do. Can you use the same information that was provided in the NDIS safety screen check? if I go to Karina for that.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. We believe it will be straightforward for applicants to fill in the registration application form online. It does take time, however, and we won't be able to use the as I've mentioned, the NDIS worker screen information. Having said that, if on the Service Victoria platform, if applicants have agreed to or consented to having their identity validation requirements saved by Service Victoria, then they will be able to access those for our application and won't have to get their photo up again and all of those requirements for the identity validation. The application form is going to be available from the 1st of July on our website, and we expect that it will be straightforward. We have been in discussions and continue to be in discussions with Service Victoria, whose platform we're using, that we've learned the lessons of some of those teething problems that occurred up from the 1st of February when the NDIS worker screen was launched.
Right, thank you, Karina. So that comes to the end of our Q&A session. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to all our presenters today and also to everyone out there who has taken time to join us for the webinar. We certainly hope you found it informative. As I mentioned, today's presentation and Q&As will be made available on our website, so feel free to go in and access that. And please do get in touch with us if you need any further information. We look forward to keeping in touch, and please subscribe to our newsletter on our website www.vdwc.vic.gov.au. Our newsletter provides ongoing updates, and there you have on your screen all the details and an email in case you wanted to follow up anything from today. You can email us at registration@vdwc.vic.gov.au. You can also call or follow us on one of our social media channels. So we look forward to keeping in touch, and have a great day, everyone.